Hello, and welcome to Godless Bitches 2.0. I'm your host, Clare Wuellner, and with me is Tracie Harris.
Hello, howdy.
Yay, and she is also a regular host on the Atheist Experience. Jen Peoples is not here today because she is in Washington, D.C., kicking ass in more than one way. She's running a 10-mile marathon, and she's been posting about her demonstrating at the hearings for Kavanaugh, and that makes me very happy. Thank you so much, Jen, for doing that.
Absolutely.
Right on. GB 2.0 is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin. It is an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. I don't have any announcements that I can think of right now. There is a lot of news, though. It looks like Kavanaugh's going to be confirmed. I'm not of any way that aware of any way that could go differently.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much a slam dunk at this point.
Yeah. Once again, I just want to say to all the people who out there who are hurting like I am, and have been for about 2 years, keep fighting. Keep your chin up. Things have got to change.
I want to mention something really quickly. It just dawned on me, but I had a thread about it, and obviously I've been, furiously posting about the hearings and about what's going on. And there was a woman who posted on my wall, like on one of the OPs, as a comment, that she felt ill about it. Now, I happen to know the person, and I knew that they had a history of sexual abuse, but somebody else didn't. And so they took it as just a general comment like, oh, this makes me sick. And I understand that. This in no way is denigrating the person who took it in a way that, most of the time when you hear it, that's what it means. Mm-hmm. But because I knew her context, I was like, that's not what she's saying. Mm-hmm. And he was just like, don't get angry, like get out there and help us fight this. And I'm like, oh, no, that's like the wrong message here, right? And before I had seen it, she had already replied and kind of just nicely explained her situation and said, it's just that, this is like, there's a history for me, and it's not that I'm saying I'm angry so much as I think I'm going to need to withdraw for a while, and I can't do this. Yeah. And I think that's something that people are going to have to take some caution with, because it didn't really dawn on me until I saw it, right? Till I saw her post. And so I certainly don't blame people for not being cognizant of this, because, I was in that same boat until I saw her post. But be aware that people who are victims of sexual assault at this point are maybe really sensitive to this in a way that makes them feel like they've just been victimized again. So I think it's really important to understand that some of the people who are probably the most upset about this are upset in a way where maybe they're not in a position where they really feel like fighting right now. Mm-hmm. They maybe feel like just going fetal for a few weeks, or, just saying like, I can't deal with this and I have to get away from it for a little bit. Mm-hmm. It isn't that they're, weak or unwilling to advocate or anything like that. It's just a visceral response that they are feeling that you can't just shake it off. It's not like, oh, go walk it off, right? I mean, they are re-traumatized by this.
Right, and I'm one of those people.
Yeah,
so.
and frankly, it doesn't even matter. Even if you're one of the people who was just like, I don't think Kavanaugh did anything wrong, you still need to be aware that this is a situation that's going to make those people more vulnerable. So it's not even, it's irrelevant where you stand on the issue. You just have to be aware that what they're seeing when they heard those attacks about she doesn't remember everything, and they're thinking that's really common for sexual assault victims, right? I mean, and I posted something about that too, the idea that if you want to attack somebody who's telling a story, if you don't believe them and you want to attack it, the wrong way to attack it is to attack those elements of what they're doing or saying that are in common with legitimate victims. Right. Like, let's say that there was somebody that I didn't believe, that I thought, whoa, their story is full of holes. They have these contradictions that are just glaring, and there's real problems with her story. If I felt that way, I would not attack her based on metrics that she shares with legitimate victims. I would be looking at the things where it differs and say, this is not like what a victim does. Pointing to the things that victims actually do and saying, this makes you not legitimate, is actually not even an attack on her so much as an attack on sexual assault victims. So be sure before you start pointing at things that you think are problematic about the particular situation, that you're not also just throwing every other sexual assault victim under the bus because of your ignorance about how sexual assault impacts people. Just be aware.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, empathy. It's all about empathy. Maybe you don't understand it instead of attacking it, which is what I've seen over and over again. And I've been fighting on Facebook about this quite a bit. Step back, and if someone says it's awful, believe them. Don't try to explain to them why it's not awful. It is awful. I'm trying to, I can't find it yet, but there was an article that I kept posting over and over again about the characteristics of people who make false accusations.
Oh,
And it outlined it very well. The people who make false accusations, they don't do it because they regretted it in the morning or something silly like that. That's absurd. Women who have experienced real awful rapes don't report it, or don't make those accusations. So just like trying to save face by saying that the guy raped, that's patently absurd. Women don't do that. People don't do that. It's going to be somebody who has, excuse me, some sort of problem. They usually have a history of making up wild tales and being a little off base.
And let me just point out that a history of being litigious is not the same as a history of and so that was one of the problems I saw. And like I say, I am not saying that if you think you see a legitimate problem with someone's story that you cannot call it out. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't call out things that don't delegitimize somebody as a means to delegitimize them, right? Like go for the things that you think would actually delegitimize them, that actually align with the reality of what would delegitimize a person. Don't go for things that actually wouldn't delegitimize. And so when Swetnick came out, I'm going to be honest, I didn't read that much about Swetnick's claim. I understood what it was. I know what Mark Judge had, what his ex said about the things he had expressed to her about the gang rape situation. And at the same time, people brought up this thing and said, oh, she's got this litigious history. She's got all these legal things behind her. And I kind of thought, well, is that relevant? Like, what kinds of legal things are we talking about? And so I went in and they were like, oh, she had this restraining order against her for an ex-boyfriend. I think it was Donald Trump Jr. was blasting that on Twitter. And so I went and looked it up to see, what is it? What's going on here? And I've looked these things up like a couple times. I've looked at stories that were like, oh, there's problems with Ford's account. And so I went and read through it. It's not like I'm ignoring information that's coming from people who are claiming to be critical of her. I am looking at it and saying, do I agree that these are delegitimizing things? And I'm not finding that they are. Yeah. But with Swetnick, the issue was that she did have an ex that filed for a restraining order and then didn't go to court and get it, right? Like, so when the court day came, they didn't show, and so there was no restraining order. I don't know what the situation was, but being clingy is different than being a liar about sexual assault, right? So when I say clingy, I understand that sounds, that might sound dismissive, and I don't mean that. If somebody really is harassing you, there's nothing minor about that. If you've been harassed by someone, that is not cool. And, especially if you think, even briefly, even if you change your mind, even if it makes you briefly consider that you have to file a restraining order, that's serious. Like, I'm not blowing that off when I say, clingy. But even a person who doesn't understand the boundaries of, hey, I want to be with you, and you're saying leave you alone, and I don't get that, that doesn't mean that they're dishonest. They may have issues, but those issues don't revolve around lying. So it's about lying about sexual assault. And so show me the litigation where she's like constantly accusing people of sexual assault, like all over the map.
Right.
And now you've got something, because now you've got a person who's like getting into accusations all the time, right? And that was one of the metrics that was listed in that article, was that they have a history of accusing people of things that are, and so I did not find that in the history of litigation that they put forward for her. I was like, I see, some litigation here, and obviously I'm a person who has very little litigation in my background, so almost anybody who's had to litigate things. Like I have a friend who's done a few lawsuits for personal injury. And I could definitely see somebody coming forward and saying, "Oh, well, she's been and done a couple. She's always suing at the drop of it." And it's like, well, no, she just happens to have had a couple of accidents where there was liability on the part of someone else. That can happen.
It does.
You can actually find yourself in that situation more than once in a lifetime,
yes, or even thrice.
And so, but I mean, I do get how somebody could be, hey, they have this history of always suing for personal, and whatever. And that might be something at least worth looking at. And I say that as somebody who has a friend that I know has been in legitimate situations, but there's multiple, multiple cases in her background where I could see somebody saying, hey, there's a history, there's a pattern of these accusations for personal liability. And certainly I would probably consider that more than, hey, she's had some lawsuits where it was over estate settlements. I would be like, why is that relevant? Right? Why would that be relevant to litigation in a personal injury case?
Yeah, right. Last week we did an extra show. Jen Peoples was here, and Tracie was out of town, so we're doing this back.
So next time it's you get to be gone,
right? Yeah.
I actually saw the YouTube video too. I just want to mention this because it was funny. Somebody said, "Hey, that's not Tracie." Ha ha! Really great show, and I thought, "Ow!" I don't know that they meant it that way, but it just came out as very funny.
That's funny. Yeah. Which, and by the way, they can't possibly have meant the way. Right?
I'm not loved by all. So
then I disagree with them. Anyhow, we had an extra show last week, and if you're a regular listener, or if you're interested in learning more about what a professional's take would be on Ford's testimony and Kavanaugh's behavior, we had someone who had 20 plus years of experience in sexual assault in terms of counseling people who've been through it. She's worked at Safe Place for forever, and she said she had worked with over 3,800 victims of sexual assault. So that's an expert to me. Leanne Cameron, she was amazing. So check out last week's show, and you'll be educated, I promise. She really knocked it out of the park. I was very happy.
And I've had a
her.
chance to go back and watch it, and it was a good viewing.
Yeah.
So I liked that show.
Right. She was really great. So yeah, Kavanaugh. So if he does, well, he will be confirmed. I've seen articles about maybe he would get impeached, and I don't hold out much hope for that, given that everything else.
You'd have to have more than just a majority in the House, I think, to make that happen.
Oh yeah.
So,
because he has perjured, that's very clear.
I think so. I mean,
not in this trial, or not in this proceeding in 2006.
I think in these proceedings he did.
Well,
I was especially kind of, I mean, some of the stuff I understand is going to be flexible with regards to how do you categorize certain behaviors. Mm-hmm. But like, for instance, the asking, telling Leahy, hey, I don't know if I was Bart Kavanaugh, and then I'm looking at something he wrote and signed in high school as Bart. It's like, okay, so what was that? I mean, what was that? That was feigned ignorance, right? I mean, you knew that was your nickname.
I agree with that assessment. When you do the research out on the internet, those are not judged terribly harshly. And so I don't, when I put forward instances where he's been accused of perjury, I go for the ones that are solid. And in 2006, there were solid. There was a solid case in which he perjured. And, that's, you might think, okay, so lying in court, that's not a big deal. That's like a cop stealing stereos. He's supposed to be a judge. He's supposed to be impeccable. And lying as a judge under oath is just, it's unconscionable. You just don't do, and you certainly don't get on the Supreme Court. But we do here in the United States. This whole thing just kills me. It just kills me. I'm having a really hard time with it, actually. So I get it if y'all are hurting. Yeah, and it's it's kind of making it hard for me to think for a second here. Okay. There's other stuff. Excuse me, I'm having allergy problems.
I think we all are. I actually took a Benadryl before the start of the show. I showed up with caffeine and Benadryl. That was my contribution to this, because I was just like, I don't want to be coughing throughout the whole show.
Right.
I'm choking it back. Let me tell you, I have the urge to cough here, and I'm just like, don't cough.
You're a hero. You're a hero. Wow. Okay, so another thing that was in the news that I thought was very interesting was that the San Francisco has a statue that memorializes what women that were called comfort women. These were women and girls forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. The San Francisco has a sister city, Osaka, Japan, and over this statue, Osaka has rescinded its sisterhood, and I find that distressing.
So they're offended by the statue commemorating these women and what happened to them?
Yes, because it puts a bad light on them.
You have to own your history. And when I say that, I don't mean let's keep up the Civil War heroes statues. I'm saying that you
contrition is important.
Yeah, it's good to remember mistakes of the past. Now, it's a different thing to put up memorials that if you glamorize mistakes of the past, or that gloss over them or something. And but I think it's I'm less keen to remember my history by memorializing in a positive way people who did negative things.
Yes.
Than I am a statue that actually is paying homage to victims and remembering victims.
That's exactly it. The San Francisco Comfort Woman Memorial is a symbol of the struggle faced by all women who have been and are currently forced to endure the horrors of enslavement and sex trafficking. San Francisco Mayor London Breed said in a statement, "These victims deserve our respect, and this memorial reminds us all of events and lessons we must never forget."
Sure. It's not like they're putting up the statue to show what a great thing it was. Right? I mean, that would be, in that case, they could be putting up the same statue and people could be saying, well, but it's just history. This was done. And it's like, yeah, but you don't want to romanticize, institutionalized rape is not a good thing to commemorate.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing, which we need to unpack. I need to scroll back up here for just a second. Okay, Yoshimura, who is the mayor or something, the equivalent of Osaka, sent a letter, and he said, quote, "Unforgivable act," although the letter addressed the, quote, "unforgivable act that violated the dignity and human rights of women," unquote, it claims Japan was not the only country of, quote, "sex on the battlefield," unquote, citing other nations such as the United States, Great Britain, and Germany. Yoshimura claims that Japan's apology has been sincere enough and pointed to a 2015 agreement with South Korea where Japan gave $8.7 million to a fund that helps World War II sexual slavery victims.
I think it's a different spin, right? I mean, it's one thing, if they were issuing a statement of condemnation against Japan today for something that was done in World War II that has been resolved. And yes, I understand what they're saying. We have acknowledged it. We are ashamed of it. We have, issued apologies for it. And, that's totally fair, right? But at the same time, a statue that kind of is a, like I say, homage to the victims of it doesn't mean I'm not trying to dig in on what was done in your country in past generations. I'm not trying to put the screws to you. I'm just simply saying let's acknowledge the pain of the people. This is there's a boundary there, right?
This is not about you.
Yeah, we're not condemning you at the current you for things done in the past. What we're doing is just commemorating the pain and what happened to these people. And he's right that other countries had situations like this, and very similar. For example, I watched a documentary about the concentration camps, and there was one camp where they took some of the female women prisoners and put them basically into brothels in the camp where, weirdly, it wasn't necessarily the guards who took advantage of this, it was other prisoners. So it was rewarding male prisoners by letting them go in and like rape these women. And you look at that and you're just like, there's a whole other level there of you're a victim in this camp, she's a victim in this camp. How could you do this to another victim? And yet, I guess I'm gonna say that being in a concentration camp can do messed up things to your head. So I'm gonna say, okay, maybe I can't put myself in that place or whatever. But yes, these things happened, right? And they were horrific. And I don't know what that would be like to be trapped in a situation where you're literally, your choice is a gas chamber or to be, constantly raped. I can't even.
Yeah, I see a parallel here between Japan's behavior, if you will, and the statue, what it's trying to say, and the behavior of people who have been trying to tear down Ford, and what she was trying to say, and what victims are trying to say. They are concerned about false accusations. It's the same sort of parallel. Well, it is really this statue and this claim, this allegation, really isn't about you.
Right.
It is about what happened and how we need to give that voice.
Right.
And so it's these things, as I've posted on my Facebook page, I don't think things have gotten worse. I think it's just getting exposed. We're finally seeing things more clearly, more often, simply because we have the media formats to do that. Excuse me. And in the thing that I posted, and I have it as a screensaver on my phone because right now I feel like we need it, if I can get rid of all the announcements. We need to, during this time, hold each other tight and continue to do the work, basically. It's hard work. And like you said, Tracy, we need to give ourselves breaks when we need it.
Yes.
And go fetal or... I mean, I've had conversations with friends that have been very, very hard. Lots of tears, lots of even alcohol. It's been pretty bad. Yeah. Anyhow, parallels there, and I don't think it's getting worse. Have to keep that in mind. I think it's just that we're seeing it more.
Oh yeah, I agree, and I think that there's a divide. Between the actual history and experience of women in the nation versus men.
Oh, gosh.
And I think that while in a larger context, this is about victims and predators, which can, span genders.
Yes.
The reality is that there is also a generalized experience of being a woman in the country. There's a generalized experience of not being a woman in this country. And one of the things that made that interesting to me was a post that I made about the false accusations, right? False allegations. And I said, it was written toward men. And what I said was, try to imagine that you live in a world where several times a day when you were in middle school and or high school, someone accused you of sexual assault falsely. You weren't sexually assaulting anybody, but several times a day you were being called into the principal's office because one of the female students had said that you groped them and you didn't. And then imagine that every guy you know has been accused accused falsely of sexual harassment, even though you don't sexually harass anybody. None of your friends sexually harass anyone. The sexual harassment isn't happening, but women keep accusing you of sexual harassment. Like all the guys you know have been accused of sexual harassment. You've been accused of it, and it's common.
And you've suffered consequences because of it.
Right,
You've
right.
been punished.
Yeah, yeah.
You've even gone to jail.
Right. And so then imagine that you're in a social circle where you maybe have like a dozen good acquaintances, and half of them have been falsely accused of rape. And they've talked to you about, their false accusation of rape experience and how that impacted their, and this. And when I posted this, I think the thing that was interesting, and again, this is one of those things where it's like I'm expressing these examples in what they taught me or what they meant to me. I am in no way condemning people who said them or participated in these threads. One of the people that the first person who posted was a guy that was just like, right on. And there were a couple guys who were just like, this is awesome. Can I repost this? And then there was, all the women who posted were like, yes, this. And then one guy posted, and this was kind of the surprise. So this was the eye-opener for me, right? One guy posted and he said, you should use a different analogy because it took me a while to understand what you were saying. And what was interesting about that is that this is a person who I will attest, like I've met him in person, I've interacted with him. He posts frequently and prolifically about, any kind of issues of injustice, is very supportive of women and injustice toward women. He will, go to bat for that. He's not afraid to engage people and argue with them about it. He's reached out to me sometimes to say, there's this situation, like, what is your take on it? I mean, this is a guy who cares. And this is a guy who wants to be the best ally he can be. And it's a guy who has been traditionally a good ally, who has, tried to do the right thing and has a heart for how do I help, and it was so interesting that he didn't see what I was saying. And I thought, wow, the difference here between, people who have had the experience of everybody I know was sexually assaulted in high school and middle school, like commonly, several times a day. It was not unusual. Sexual harassment, sure, we've all experienced that, rape, yes, plenty of my friends have told me the stories about their rapes, and they didn't come forward and they didn't charge anybody, but this happened to them, right? They're not trying to get anything out of it. They're just saying after so many years, hey, look, this happened to me one night. And I'm just not sure. I think sometimes what it made me think was maybe this is why the anger that it's being expressed from like the Me Too movement is being misunderstood as like an unjustified level of anger. It's like, no, this is a totally understandable level of anger. And I think from where I'm sitting, I'm looking at it like, why does it surprise you that there's so much anger? Like, I'm surprised this thing didn't blow up years ago.
Because they don't live our lives.
Right. But when you understand, when your experience is everybody I know has been sexually assaulted, and often, and everybody I know and has been, sexually harassed. And a lot of people I know have been raped. And so when we see somebody coming forward who isn't, is telling a story that's just like, yeah, don't we all, know this? I mean, she's not even going so far as rape. She's going a little bit, I would say she took it, her story is a little bit beyond the normal sexual assault that most women experience, because I think the hand over the mouth bit of the story was
horrifying,
goes beyond the norm. And I even had that conversation with a guy I know. So I was talking to this person, and they were like, well, gosh, if we're going to get in trouble for everything we did when we were, kids and not really adult and not really that responsible as we might be as adults. And I was like, that's not what this is about, And I said, not only that, but what's the accusation here is not just like what anybody would do. And he's like, well, I did things when I was in school. And I said, did you ever put your hand over a woman's mouth to silence her? And he's like, no, I never did that. And I was like, okay, then this is not what every guy does. This is a different this starts to rise to a different category now, where it's not just like I think I'm engaging in some sort of mutual drunken groping that might be mutually, acceptable, to I understand you don't accept this and I'm going to make you not express that it's not okay. Yeah. And again, it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. My only point is that I don't think most guys should be able to relate to this story because I don't think most guys have done anything like this. And there's a whole other story. I know you have a lot of news, but there's another story that has come up recently because I've been asked to go and speak by the Houston Humanists on women in atheism. They have a panel. And so I said, okay, I'll participate in the panel. And I was at a convention, an atheist convention, where I was talking about something completely different. I was up there with another person from ACA, and we were talking, and one of the people asked a question about women at the conferences and harassment at the conferences, and I just tried to explain how sexuality historically has been weaponized against women. It's been a tool to humiliate, to punish, to even violently violate them. I mean, it's like a way to put them in their place. I mean, sexuality is got a lot of negative baggage for women because of the negative ways in which it's used. I'm not saying that all sex for all women is negative. In fact, my hope is that women enjoy sex and that they feel free to express it, and I would love to see that, but I can't deny that it's been weaponized as a tool to harm women all through history. Yeah. And after I got out of that, somebody came up to me later and they said, after you were giving that talk about sensitivity, like sexual sensitivity, she had on some kind of little, I guess, like devil horns. Like it was like a little thing that you wear and it had devil horns. And apparently a guy came up to me. She goes, I don't even know who he was, just another guy at the conference. And he's like, ooh, does that mean you're a horny little devil? And she's just like, I couldn't believe somebody said that to me right after you had made this really clear point about be a little aware, be a little sensitive about, what sexuality means to women and can mean to women. I guess potentially, I don't want to tell women what it means to each of them, but this definitely has the potential to be taken as aggressive.
Yeah, if it had been a friend of hers, that's one thing.
Right.
But when you're a total stranger and you walk up to me and say something that's very personal or something that you only would say to me like I was a friend. I had a recent incident where somebody kind of cornered me and was saying, oh, here's all the beautiful people, and he was trying to compliment me in a way, and I said, I don't know you. What you're saying is really inappropriate. Get out of my way. But it was scary because I didn't know him. Now, if I see you, Tracie, and you're like, oh, you look awesome today, that's another thing. Right. Or a man.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, if I'm dressed up, nicely, clearly dressed up to go to the opera or something, and I post that photo to Facebook, I expect people to comment on my on how I look. That's why I'm posting it. I'm all dressed up. Feel free to comment. Don't get weird, but you can say nice things about it. But the story goes on, right? So later. I had an incident with a fan there that made me feel uncomfortable in the way that you might feel uncomfortable when you walk into a furniture store and you see the salesperson coming after you, and you really are just there to browse, and you don't need the hard sell right now, and you don't know if they're working on commission, but you're like, oh, please, and they come over and start to talk to you. It was that kind of uncomfort. I don't want people to think like, oh, I was in fear of being raped, or I was, it's nothing like that. It was just this uncomfortable thing I get with certain fans who seem to kind of, I'm going to just say, mildly stalk me. And that is different than coming up and saying, hey, I'm a fan, I've seen you on the show. That is a normal fan interaction. Yes. Right. But the fan interaction of somebody who sort of acts almost like it's not okay to come and talk to you, and they sort of just hang around the periphery, and it's like, no, just come on up and say, hey, creepy. I'm there at the conference. I'm there to meet people. It's okay. And I can even understand, like I've had people that were a little afraid to come and talk, and I kind of saw it, and I'd be like, hey, come over, let's talk, But this guy did introduce himself, and he was what I would call like hyper aware of my gender. So this would be the person who every time they talk to you, they're saying things like, it's so great to see an intelligent woman. get up and talk, and you're thinking, yeah, because most women are just so unintelligent, right? Or they'll say things about, like, it's great to see women doing this, and it's not. And sure, if it's great to see, I think it's great to see women so energized in the politics right now. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But when everything you say to a female is got something to do with their gender all the time, you're hyper aware of the gender there. It's like, don't see me as a human being that also has this context of woman, not as a woman who happens to be a human being. And so I'm just, if this is useful to anybody, fine. There's no laws against it. You can do whatever you want to do. I'm not saying it needs to be illegal or you need to be banned from a conference for being hyper aware of gender. Like, whatever, do what you want to do. But I'm just saying this guy had the hypergender thing. So he's like the fanboy, hyper focused on the fact that I'm a woman, which makes me hyper aware of my gender the whole time I'm talking to him. And I don't like that because I'm usually not, despite the fact that I do Godless Bitches.
Right.
I don't walk around thinking woman, right? And so I just walk around doing my stuff. And if somebody brings it up and makes a point about, women and brings it, that's fine. But when it's all the time, right? So this guy was hyper into that. And throughout the conference, there were situations where I would be somewhere and I would just happen to notice him and I would think, oh man, here he comes again. And several times, nothing happened. So someone like the salesperson in the furniture store is coming up to you and you're like, oh man, here comes the hard sell. And then they just walk past and go talk to their manager. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess they were just, it's just because I'm so used to the hard sell in the furniture store. So it's just me, right? It's just me. So I thought, this is just, am I being paranoid? Am I just noticing him because of the awkwardness of the original conversation? And so now I'm hyper aware of him being around. And so I'm having this weird sort of self-doubt thing going on. And there was one point where it kind of made me chuckle because he kept walking past, almost like in a long-term pacing thing. And I thought, this is almost like shark-like, right? Like the shark going by, the shark going by. And I'm like, I'm just freaking myself out. I need to just get past it, get over it. So he makes it past finally, coming by, and he walks up, straight to me at this point. He turns and walks straight to me and gets literally, in my personal space, starts whispering to me and says,
yikes,
and says something to the effect of, I just want you to know that there are some people at this conference who really have to hold themselves back from completely harassing you. And I was like, that is...
E.P. Cray.
Right. Now, I'm just going to say, I think most people that do things like that, I don't think they're aware of it. I don't think that he meant it maliciously. I think that was kind of his way of trying to flatteringly say, I'm a big fan. I honestly think that this was not coming from a place of, let me be creepy. I think it was coming from a place of, I'm a big fan. Maybe I feel intimidated by you in some ways, which I wish people didn't.
Right.
And then, and I'm just letting you know that I would really, really be talking to you the whole time because you're, because I like you so much, right? Which I get that aspect of it. I'm not here to say the guy's a demon, right? I'm just saying this was something that happened at the conference. And then what was interesting to me is that later on, when I relayed this story to the woman who had talked to me about the horns, she says to me, because I had made a comment that I don't really get harassed or I don't really get any kind of harassment at the conference. She's like, how is that not harassment? And it made me stop and think about, how I think about harassment, because I have this weird thing. I'm in a weird situation where on the one hand, being who I am, some guys may be kind of harassing and be intimidated to do that to me because they don't want to do that to somebody that has a voice or that is, empowered. On the other hand, I guess I have a hard time trying to balance out, is this something that happens to me because of this perceived celebrity? Or is this something that happens to me because I'm a woman? How do I parse that? If somebody's coming around and they're being a little too much, is it because of a gender thing, or is it because of a celebrity thing, or what is it? And so she was kind of putting it in the context of, that sounds like harassment to me.
I'm willing to bet that does not happen to what you just described, does not happen to male famous atheists so much.
I'm
sure it happens.
I'm going to say there was a guy at the conference who had women who he didn't know, just to kind of balance this out, women he didn't know who made very highly personal comments about his genitals because of his height when he was coming out of the bathroom. I mean, completely inappropriate. So I'm not saying necessarily, but I know this is like a long story. But to bring it back, I was talking to the woman with the devil horns, right? And she says to me, there's the guy. And she points him out, and it's the same dude that was talking to me. And this is what's interesting. I didn't feel uncomfortable, and we all know atheist conferences are predominantly attended by men. I did not feel uncomfortable with like any of the other guys there. No other guy at that conference made me uncomfortable. None of them did anything that like made me feel like really awkward or I hope they don't talk to me or, you know, I felt completely okay and like everybody else behaved in a huge range of what is normal. There was no problems with anybody else. But now I've got me and this woman that happened to approach me about the issue because of a small comment that I made in a much larger talk that wasn't even about, you know, conference and women and stuff like that. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, how many women did this guy approach at this conference who have similar stories who I didn't meet, right? I mean, and so what you've got is like it takes like one to go around and make like a dozen women uncomfortable, right? I mean, it doesn't take every guy at the conference being insensitive to make a lot of women go home from that conference and say, oh my gosh, this one guy. And that to me is an important point because I think there's a whole lot of women having this experience, and there probably are a good number of men who are like, I wouldn't do this to a woman. So, you know, why, how is this so pervasive? I don't abuse women. I don't have friends that I'm aware of that are abusing women. So what's going on here? And I just want to point out that, you know, you can have one guy who abuses his partner and he goes through partners, and now you have a dozen women who have suffered from relationship abuse. And just because of one person, right? So it really doesn't take a majority of guys doing this to make a majority of women victims of this. And I just want to kind of point that out. It's the men who are thinking like, I'm getting condemned in this group, it's like, there is going to be some gender aspect to it because there are gender percentages that weigh into this thing. But at the same time, I think that the pervasiveness of the stories among women in the culture doesn't necessarily reflect that we believe that all men are doing this.
No.
It doesn't take all men to be doing this to like make a lot of, like when I remember the sexual assaults that I had in middle school, it was predominantly two guys, mainly one. And I know they were doing it to other girls at the school. We didn't report it because we weren't raised to think there's anything, you know, we didn't like it. But we weren't raised to think that, hey, this is sexual assault. We were kind of raised like, oh, guys are just handsy sometimes, or guys are going to try to grope you if they think they can get away with it, and you just sort of smack their hand away, or you know, you just sort of whatever cover yourself more, and this was just pervasive because of a couple of guys that thought that they could run around and grab girls by the crotch, grab girls by the breasts, and they thought that was funny, and nobody was going to do anything about it. It's kind of like when Trump said, you know, and they let you. I didn't consent to any of that. None of the girls they were grabbing were consenting to it, but we let them because we were raised in a way that we didn't really think it was that big of a deal.
And here's the thing, guys. We don't know which one of you is that guy right off the bat. And that's why a lot of women are leery in general. That's why we cross the street. We don't know ahead of time. And when the power imbalance is what it is, taking a chance isn't wise. It just isn't wise. And that's speaking from experience. When you've been in a woman's body long enough, you just know stuff happens. And you take measures to protect yourself. Which reminds me of a thing that I saw and I've actually tried to express this to men before, about how we live in a different world than women do. And this is not to discount or ignore transgender or any non-normative person, because I know that their experience is much worse. This is just my experience, so I can talk about it because I know it really well. When men keep themselves safe from, say, rape, I guess one of the jokes is that, and it's not a very funny joke, is that you stay out of prison. For women to avoid rape, I mean, I would never be in the house without the doors unlocked. When I get in my car, the first thing I do is lock my car. I check in the back seat. I don't go out walking around at night, generally speaking. When I sometimes go for walks with a friend early in the morning when it's still dark, and the only reason I'm comfortable doing it is because I have the dog. The way I live my life, and so many women live their lives, is determined by whether they feel safe or not. It's changed by what they do to keep themselves safe. And if you don't believe me or don't think that it's that extreme, ask a woman that you know well. Ask what she does. Ask how she lives. Ask all the things that she does to keep herself safe.
Those conversations are always a point of gender differential on my page, right? Mm-hmm. So it never fails that when we talk about what do you do as far as safety, or if I post something that women generally do, mm-hmm. There will be men that post and they're just like, whoa, I didn't mm-hmm. know that, that women felt that way, or that mm-hmm. that was the life that they're living. There was an interesting little post that someone made called Men, We Hear You. Mm-hmm. And it sort of took all that, don't get raped advice that women always hear, and it put it in the context of don't get falsely accused of rape. And then it put, only go to parties with your friends, mm-hmm. make sure that you're never alone with a strange mm-hmm. woman because she might accuse you. And, it was tongue-in-cheek, clearly. But at the same time, I think while I was reading it, I've always known that the advice that's given to women to avoid rape is really ridiculous and bogus. But it put it in the perspective of, wow, when I hear it applied to something else, it sounds even more ridiculous, right? Like this sounds so ridiculous, and the only reason is that we don't normally apply it to this. Mm-hmm. But it's so normally applied to women avoiding rape that it's funny how normalized that advice sounds until you hear it applied. When I'm pretty sure that if you were telling men, well, if you really want to avoid a false rape accusation, just don't ever be alone with a woman mm-hmm. unless you think you can trust her to have sex with you and not accuse you of rape. Mm-hmm. Always or have a buddy.
If you're going to go, advice I was given years ago is that if you go home with a guy, you have to put out because that's what they expect.
Or that if something happens, it's your fault.
It's your fault, right. So if you're going to go out with a girl and go home, a woman, and go home with them, just expect to be accused of rape. Just expect it.
Yeah.
What?
And I'm pretty sure, like I say, I can't speak for men in this, but when I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, this sounds completely ridiculous. And I'm thinking that with the same, parallel in my head saying, this is what women hear all the time. Mm-hmm. We hear this all the time.
Yeah.
And I say that as a woman who's very trusting, right? Like I think as far as steps go, and what's funny is, okay, so this is the other side of the coin. I met somebody on a dating site. We exchanged super brief conversation. They sent me the original thing. I responded with a decline. They came back with a nice acceptance of the decline, but saying if I had changed my mind, whatever. They kind of addressed some of my concerns. And I wrote them back and said, you know what, if that's how you feel, let's go ahead and meet. Mm-hmm. So we went ahead and met. That was it. We had the four mm-hmm. emails that went mine, his, mine, or his, mm-hmm. mine, his, mine. Mm-hmm. Met him at this restaurant I had recommended that was completely always packed. And there was like a 2-hour wait. And so we decided to go to a different one. I didn't want to bring 2 cars. It just seemed ridiculous. So I said, can we go, do you mind driving? And he was like, no, I don't mind driving. And so we got in his car and we went to the other restaurant. And later, he expressed to me that he thought that was a really dangerous thing for me to have done, right? And he was just like, I couldn't believe that you suggested this and were okay with it. And I could have done something to you. And how would you? And I kind of laughed and I said, well, if we're on the road and you start getting weird, I'm just going to grab the wheel and crash us into the the first thing I can crash us into. I mean, we're going to have a car accident because I'm going to grab that wheel and pull as hard as I can. And he's like, what if I respond by just bashing your head into the dash until you're unconscious? And so there was kind of this conversation that happened with it. But the point is, here I was treating this guy like a trustworthy guy, and he's judging me for it and saying, what the hell? Why would you trust me? Right? And so, like, it's kind of sort of heads I win, tails you lose, right? You don't trust, and it's like, why don't you trust me? You don't even know me. And then you do trust somebody, it's like, why the hell would you trust me? You don't even know me, right? And I'm like, I don't know, what can you do? You just have to do what makes you comfortable. Yeah. So when I speak about these issues, a lot of times what I'm doing is saying, this is how a lot of women think about it. And I've learned that from talking to a lot of women. Sometimes my experience overlaps with what most women experience. Like I will, let somebody know I'm going out with this person. Here's their number. Here's who they are. Stuff like that. That a lot of men on my Facebook page say, I don't do things like that. Yeah. And so, there's going to be crossover. But my point is, there are some things where I have in common with women, and other times where I'm like, totally deviating. I think a lot of women would be like, what the hell? You got in a car with this guy you don't even know. You've never even met him. You don't know his friends. You don't know anything about him. You don't even know what he does for a living. Yeah. Like, you know nothing about this guy. And you got in a car, and I was just like, worst that can happen is I'm going to grab that wheel and just yank it as hard as I can, So that was my plan. Yeah. And that was,
had you actually thought about that ahead of time, though, that you would grab the wheel, or had you?
I think that would always be my go-to. I think every time I've seen a movie where somebody gets abducted and they're actually in traffic. Now, obviously if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're out in the middle of nowhere. But you have to get out in the middle of nowhere, which means you have to go through some place where there's other cars before you get to that rural setting. And if there's not a weapon on me, if there's not a gun pointed at me, I'm grabbing that wheel and I'm just going to yank that as hard as I can and wreck into another car so that it's a required stop.
Gentlemen, have you considered these things? Probably not. Whereas I have been taught that if you are ever told to get into a car, don't. Yeah. Do anything not to get in that car because you're not going to be alive when you are seen next. And I have had an experience where this is a long story. What time is it?
11:51.
Yeah, I don't know. I won't get into it. But I did get into a car with somebody I thought I could trust, and it started to go south. And I was in a city I didn't know with a guy I thought I knew, but I didn't. And I asked him to take me back to the hotel where we both stayed, but in different rooms. And I was afraid because I didn't know the city. It was his car. I'm in there. What can I do? Because it wasn't just that he was some stranger. He was well known in the community that I was from. It was academia. So, just grabbing the wheel, am I going to kill this guy? It happens.
Yeah, and I want to say that, as you're talking, thinking back, when I was 15 years old, I was sexually assaulted in a vehicle by a relative when we were on the highway. And, what am I going to do? Demand that he stop the car so I can walk out in the middle of the night? I was being driven home from a babysitting thing. And it was like, I was shocked. I had never had an issue with this particular person before. And it was somebody that, I had known since childhood. And if suddenly, I guess at 15, I don't know what was going on with them, but something changed and they just started groping me in the car when I was 15 and we're on the highway. And what am I going to do? But yeah, I was scared. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was just terrified. And just all I could think of was, how do I get away? Like, how do I get away? And I did tell a friend at the time. I did have a best friend, and I confided that to her. I never told anybody else in the family. And to this day, I've told a couple other people about the situation, and I expressed it to a guy that I knew pretty well, that I'd known for years, and his thing was just like, why the hell did you allow that to happen? Like, why didn't you do something about it? You're 15. It's not like you were, a little kid. And I'm just like, how do you explain to somebody like the freezing terror that you feel when you know this is not supposed to be happening to you? And it is, and it's somebody that you trust and somebody that, it's like really wild situation. And even with that in my history, I still got in the car. with this other guy. You know, it's like I was still trusting. I was still just like, okay, well, you know, this guy seems okay. Like I got nothing going off in my head that's like, hey, there's a problem with this dude. And I felt comfortable with him, and you know, but you know, maybe it could have gone south. It could have gone wrong, right? There could have been. I could end up getting bashed into a dashboard until I was unconscious, and you know, who knows? Yeah. But I guess people react differently, and I don't know if it's surprising that I still had that comfort level to get in a car with a stranger after that. But I mean, it wasn't a stranger who did that to me, right? It wasn't like I got in a car with a stranger who did it. I got in a car with somebody I knew, which is the real MO, right? Like mainly, like you said, the problem that you had was with someone you knew. And this is the thing. It's like, you know, statistically, you're probably safer getting... I'm not going to say get in cars with strangers, but you know, statistically, you're safer with a stranger than you are with a relative or friend.
Yeah, according to rape statistics, it's people known to you very, very often. So, boy, we have gone all over the map. I would like to end on a couple of happy notes, though, if we may.
Sure.
First is an article from the. I want to. Oh God. Hemant Mehta, I can't think of the name.
The Friendly Atheist?
Friendly Atheist, thank you. The Friendly Atheist, he posted this, and it's just lovely. So, I don't know, Mark, if you can put the picture up of the person here. The Secular Student Alliance just got its first middle school chapter. Now that 12-year-old student Bailey Harris has begun one at Open Classroom Charter School in, get this, Salt Lake City.
Wow.
Yeah. Salt Lake City, Utah. For those of you who are maybe elsewhere in the world or been living under a rock, Salt Lake City is the mecca, if you will, for Mormons. The population of Mormons there must be, 90% or something?
Yeah, it's big.
It's extraordinarily pervasive, and it runs everything. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Bailey has been featured on this site for, that would be Hemant Mehta's site.
Friendly Atheist.
For her series of Stardust books exploring the universe and introducing science to children. So this is a little girl to be watched. See what she does in the world. No wonder the 7th grader wanted to start a group to discuss religion with her classmates. Through her father, Doug, I asked Bailey some questions about why she started the group and what she hopes to accomplish. I was told the group is currently going through the approval process, but there don't appear to be any obstacles. There's a supportive faculty sponsor, and Bailey has received overwhelming support from school staffers and other students in Salt Lake City. This is interesting. It's possible there will be some pushback later from religious students who don't think or don't understand why, really, an atheist group should exist at their school, but Bailey is prepared for those conversations. Bailey is most excited by the idea of creating a safe community for secular students at her school. There are so many secular students that feel that they are alone, and she believes that this will help them find each other and build a positive community. In Utah, religious students have a very natural, built-in community. Most of the high schools have a Mormon seminary building built next door to the schools, and the schools allow release time for students to take Book of Mormon and other religious classes. It's basically Sunday school. She feels that having Secular Student Alliance on campus will help secular students feel that they are a part of something special as well. As for discussion topics, they'll run the gamut of social political concerns that preteens are discussing anyway, like women's rights and LGBTQ rights, which are difficult to debate without religion entering the conversation. The group will also be doing some charity work. More power to her if she can get it off the ground and running. Just wow and wonderful. I kudos to you, kiddo.
That's great.
Awesome. Let's see. The community building and having a safe place. I'll tell you what, that is important. And I have that, and I hope wherever you are, you have it. And if you don't have it, you can build it. And if you don't know how to build it, there's a Godless Bitches episode on it, if you look back in history there. It's just a few episodes ago. And also just 2 weeks ago, I can't remember now. Oh, wait, no, it's going to air soon. We are going to have an episode in which Mandisa Thomas talks about how and why she started her group. So there are special reasons to start groups. Sometimes it's because of race. Sometimes it's because you need that safe place where religion is so incredibly pervasive, like in Salt Lake City. And Tracie, you said you had a happy story.
Oh,
too.
yeah, I think that was just the little girl, right? Like,
Yeah.
So little girl at her school had a Ruth. What was it? It was a superhero day, I guess, where they got to dress up like superheroes, and she's like apparently a big Ruth Bader Ginsburg fan. So she dressed up like RGB. And I think it's funny because they're running that a series called, Notorious RGB, and they called her Adorable RGB. And
She's super cute.
yeah, and she went to her school as RGB, and then somebody in Ginsburg's office saw it, sent it to her, and Ginsburg was like, I need to send her a little note. So she sent her a little handwritten note. So the little girl got a letter from Ginsburg, and apparently she was super excited about that when she got home. I couldn't wait to read it when she got home from school. And she's a prolific reader, apparently, and like the little girl likes to read. And in Googling some other things, what I found is that there's actually a Halloween costume where you can buy it and dress up like RGB if that's what you want to do for Halloween. I'm telling you, anybody that comes to my door in that is getting like double fistfuls of candy. So just FYI, to the kiddies out there, if you're in my neighborhood, show up and you will get the lion's share for that one.
Yeah. Oh man, that reminds me. I should. My daughter has always wanted to be badass things for Halloween costume. When she was like 5 years old, I think, she wanted to be a fire wolf. And I was like, okay, how do you do a fire wolf? But we'll do a fire wolf. And we did the makeup, and she crouched and snarled, and it was awesome. And then Velociraptor and Ventress. If you know Star Wars, Ventress is one of the powerful, almost witch-like women.
Okay.
And she knocked that puppy out of the park. Maybe I should bring that for the Halloween episode to show people my daughter just dressed up as Ventress. And this year, she wants to be a witch, which I think is awesome. That's what I wanted to always be when I was a kid at Halloween, because I wanted that sort of power. So that's some good stuff for you, y'all. All righty. So with the stuff that's coming up in the world, if you're hurting again, I feel it. Yeah, I understand. If you're in the Austin area, come to the ACA. I'll give you a mom hug. And just remember this. We don't need a savior. We have each other. It's all we've ever had and all we'll ever need.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracie.
Thank you.